Betsy, what inspired you or caused you to begin your career in public relations in the first place?
Well, I was hungry and I needed a job. And I was new to Chicago, and I had come out of radio in Pittsburgh. And I had come out here, and it was difficult to find a job in radio because radio was running scared of television. And there was one experimental television station in town, and you know, people were lined up for blocks to get in, and there wasn't a chance for me, an outsider, and so I got pretty desperate about what to do. I had some writing skills. I had done production, and I could write for The Voice, which turned out to be a great advantage. And so, and I met a woman who became my first and greatest mentor. She simply took a liking to me. She headed up the Midwest Council, or for the Advertising Council, the Midwest office, and her name was Duffy Schwartz. And of course, everyone knows that the Advertising Council is really the public relations arm of the advertising industry, and it had come out of World War I. And so she took a liking to me and took my measure and decided that I had some writing skills, and said there was an agency in town that handled all the major nonprofit campaigns, the Red Cross, which was the organization in the city at the time, and the Community Chest, which ultimately became the United Way, and the March of Dimes, and the Girl Scouts, and hospital campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. So she said they have a part-time, not a part-time, a short-term job for radio and television public relations for the upcoming Red Cross campaign. And she said, I want you to go over and get the job. And I said, I don't know anything about public relations. I had never heard the term before. You understand, of course, this is 1947. I'm really an ancient vintage. And so she said in her laconic style, that's all right. You just go over and get the job. So I went over, and she said, and then you come back and I'll tell you what to do. So I went over, and they must have been, you know, desperate because the campaign was upcoming. So they hired me, and I went back to Duffy and I said, well, I got the job. Now what do I do? And she told me what to do. And so that was my introduction to public relations from that edge of the business. And I stayed with the firm. After the campaign was over, I went back to Duffy and said they asked me to stay on full time. And she said, but of course, that was, you know, her style. And she mentored me for about 15 or 20 years. And I was not the only person that she had mentored. She's a remarkable woman who was an executive at a time when very few women claimed that kind of position. And she was, she knew everybody, and everybody knew her and respected her. And there are many of us who owe our careers to that splendid woman. And she got me on the edges of public relations.
When did you join the Edelman firm?
I joined the Edelman firm in 1960, 61, and I was with the Edelman firm for 13 years. And it was 13 very exciting years because Dan Edelman was a very exciting and demanding and brilliant professional with whom to work, and I eventually became his second as executive vice president because at the time, Dan did not care too much for the business side of the business. He loved public relations, particularly in its marketing aspects, and had been tremendously successful in that area, and he enjoyed it, and that's where he wanted to be. So that was my baptism into matters of personnel and finance and board activity and so forth.
What caused you to leave that position and go elsewhere?
Well, first of all, I think it's I had always worked for agencies. I'd worked for agencies since I entered the field in 1947, and congenitally, I am programmed to say yes to every opportunity. First of all, that's my style, and I remember well that one day the vice president for AT&T, Paul Lund, took me to lunch, and after we got through some professional business, he propositioned me to come join AT&T, and Paul was, a great salesman, difficult to say no to, and there seemed to be a great deal of excitement being generated around the Bell system in those early years of the 70s, and so I thought it would be wonderful to be on the corporate side of the house. And we had some conversations that went on both in Chicago and in New York, and so I decided to jump ship from the agency world to the corporate world and kind of come full circle and experience in the field.
I think that was one of Paul Lund's most brilliant moves that he made, and also I think the fact that you were willing to do that speaks a lot to yourself. I gather that turned out to be a positive experience from your standpoint.
Oh, indeed, and it was a totally different aspect of the practice of public relations for me. I had, in working with the Edelman firm and in previous agencies, I had some wonderful clients. I still look back with great joy and affection for clients like Oscar Mayer and Armour, and especially Play School Toys and Burgess Battery, and especially the nonprofit group. I still have a great affection for the Red Cross, and I shall be a Girl Scout till I leave the planet. But I had never been on the inside of a company. I had always been, on the outside, either counseling or performing whatever function they had retained us to perform. And it's quite a different thing to be inside a company and be part of its corporate culture, or try to catch up and be part of its corporate culture. And the difference, it's interesting that you pose the question, what is, and when I talk to students, they often don't think of this. In my experience, I found that, for example, the Bell System's function in life was to deliver telecommunications service to the wide population, all the population of this country and beyond. And that was its reason for being. And public relations played a role in that. And happily, it was a very distinctive and important role. But it was not the main business of the Bell system. Whereas I had gone through, how many years? 20 plus years working for agencies where the business that I was in was public relations. So that everyone concerned, for example, in the Edelman organization, was woke up in the morning and thought about the practice of public relations and how they could serve their clients best, but nevertheless, at heart, the business that we were in was public relations. Quite different when you are within a corporate organization and its business is not public relations. Its business is to produce a product or a service and to deliver it responsibly.
Very good distinction between the two different worlds.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the accomplishments that you achieved over the years that you were most proud of as far as the public relations world goes?
Oh my. Well, as it turned out, I was very proud to be part of that turbulent time in the late 70s and early 80s when, in its infinite wisdom, the United States government broke up the Bell system. It was a particular challenge from the point of view of a public relations practitioner because you were dealing with a culture and a commitment by 1 million people to service and the delivery of telecommunications, from its most sophisticated with the Bell Laboratories to the person on the line who was delivering repair and installation service, and, going out at 4 o'clock in the morning to help little old ladies repair their phones. That culture, and I need not tell you, so that was such that people had joined it the minute they had graduated from high school or college, and they had, it was a lifetime. It was a lifetime commitment. So when it was inevitable that that culture was going to be fractured by government order or court order, then you had to find some new loyalties or build some new loyalties and help people understand and accept the inevitable, and to transfer their loyalties to other corporations, to other entities that were formed after the Bell system was broken up. And that whole challenge in terms of human relationships was a remarkable experience of which to be a part, and I was very privileged. I'm sorry that it had to happen, but when you stop and think about public relations and its fundamental charge and fundamental responsibility is to face, meet, and resolve problems. And certainly this was a problem of mega proportions, and to be a part of it, to happen to be a part of it, was a great privilege, and I was very proud to be in the company of some wonderful professionals who handled it with great skill.
Betsy, your career has been very, very successful from the time that you actually started working with the nonprofits through your experience with the Bell system. What personal qualities do you have that you feel enabled you to achieve the kind of success that you did? What were the abilities that your case really will help make a difference in your ability to influence others?
Well, I suppose one has to confess to being a workaholic. That's for starters. And it's a very, that's a siren song because it has its disadvantages as well. But falling in love with work and staying at it until the problem is solved brings, I think, another either a virtue or fault. I grew up liking puzzles, and I've always thought that public relations people, aside from being workaholics and in love with what they do, are people who do like problem solving in its many guises. And it's interesting. You were talking earlier about some of the client experiences I had. That was one of the joys of working in the original play school toys, because you had to learn a lot about preschool behavior and preschool development with some of the geniuses at the time, Bruno Bettelheim and others at some at Yale University. Before much had been known about preschoolers, or much had been thought about them, and how their work is their play, or their play is their work. And I learned that about people who like puzzles, and I think ultimately that interest in puzzles, which translates as it grows into problem solving, has been very useful. It's the challenge, that serves you well.
Well, I think that's one positive thing. I wouldn't have thought of that immediately, but you are a skilled writer and a very fast writer and very articulate, both as a writer and as a speaker. Where did you acquire those, or when did you acquire those types of skills that really helped you advance many different stories and positions in a very positive nature?
Well, I think I had mentioned earlier that I worked in radio, which had all kinds of disciplines as far as writing is concerned. Prior to that time, I had, through school, been a writer, but mostly for print, for college magazines and that kind of thing. So that my experience in radio was the first time I was ever challenged to write for The Voice, and it, as I said, it has served me very well, including the fact that I can remember well that I wrote the house commercials for a B. White furniture store, and in a minute commercial you had to mention B. White furniture store at least 12 times, and that's a challenge and a trick I've never forgotten. But that was very very healthy and very new. I mean, we're talking late 40s, and writing for The Voice was really quite rare. Even today, there are not that many schools in terms of their education for public relations which offer courses in speech writing. And let me tell you that speech writing, the keys to the kingdom, certainly in the corporate world, because you do have to understand the issues that an executive, particularly CEOs, want to convey. You have to be able to listen to their voice styles, learn how they think, so that a speech for you is quite different than a speech for someone else, and so that's a very valued skill today in public relations. So I have appreciated the fact, I'm a great believer in providence. That probably is something else that has characterized my career in public relations, because unlike the textbook wisdom, I never really had a plan. And I think it's obvious from some of the recital here. I did not know or understand or had heard of public relations, and yet I was prepared for it at its moment in time, back post World War II, and I do think that sometimes, if you're too hard and fast about planning, it can get in the way of some very exciting times.
We're going to come back in a minute to your views of public relations education, but before we leave, the talents and criteria that a public relations person should have in order to be effective, what characteristics do you see in others that are sort of self-defeating types of things that people do, either representing public relations or representing themselves in a meeting, that really kind of, where they put themselves down, like, for example, maybe not being a good listener? I mean, are there things like that you ever cringe when somebody says or does something?
Well, I think you touched on a very critical area of the business of listening. That's part of our business. Not simply to listen to our clients, whether they are clients within an organization or company, or clients that are outside and served by an agency. Because if we are to be truly involved in terms of building strong and trustworthy relationships with the publics that a company wishes to serve, or with whom a company wishes to relate, then we've got to be the ear. We've got to listen, because the whole business of one-way communication, of course, which was our stock and trade in our early years, just simply won't do. And we have to be able to listen to those audiences and listen to what their different needs and their reactions and their opinions and their values are, and translate those for the company or the client that we serve, and actually be a champion for those particular audiences and their viewpoints. Not necessarily that the client has to buy in and accept those views, but the client must respect and appreciate those views, so that we are that broker between those audiences and the companies, be they for-profit, not-for-profit, whatever organizations that we serve, so that to get to your original question, if someone is not a good listener, an astute listener, then I fail to see how he or she can be very successful in this business. In fact, not to be a good listener is to be arrogant in our particular world. I also think that surely there can be none in our population now who believe that they can, they have such influence that they can make or break a story. I mean, that was part of our early history as well. That too is another kind of arrogance in the practice. So, and then I see people, and I'm sure that we can't escape this conversation without talking about trust and ethics and honest behavior, because if those characteristics are not part of the warp and woof of what we do and our actions and what we insist on from the organizations that we serve, then we are not true public relations people, or not true corporate communications people, whatever name or guise or umbrella under which we stand. But if we are not people of ethical personal behavior, then I don't see how we can suddenly be champions for ethical behavior in the marketplace.
Betsy, you have an inordinately remarkable way of kind of launching a half a dozen subjects all at one time. And I have to kind of back up and take them one at a time. But I want to come and talk about ethics and business and that sort of thing a little bit. But I want to go back to the education thing. You are a champion for public relations education without parallel in this world today. You have launched more public relations initiatives in the field of education than any other single person I know. And I wonder if we could talk about that for a little bit, and if you could tell me what you, just kind of start with, what you think constitutes a good education in public relations.
Well, fundamentally, I think a good education in public relations is grounded in the liberal arts. We are ultimately dealing with the stuff of human behavior, of culture, and normally that is defined in education as the arts and sciences, liberal arts. And so that must be the groundwork for any student that's preparing for the field of public relations. And indeed, that's not a lonely opinion. Ever since the first people in the mid 70s were courageous enough to start defining the curriculum for a new fledgling profession called public relations. And they were two huge giants called Carol Bateman and Scott Cutlip, along with a few hangers-on like myself. That has always been a given, that you must have a foundation in the liberal arts and the arts and sciences, because you must understand the culture in which you are to practice. And then the basic skill with which we must be equipped is the skill of writing in all of its many guises, whether it's for print or for the voice, or it has, all new dimensions today. But the use of words with which we communicate ideas and opinions, so that writing is a basic skill. Then as education has grown in public relations, we ask that a student have some command of research, that they know how to plan to address a particular objective or problem, and to plan for its solutions. That then they are capable of putting those plans into action, and then the fourth requirement, which is getting more and more attention these days, at long last, thanks to such organizations as the Institute for Public Relations. We must be able to evaluate and measure our effectiveness after the plan has been completed and the action has been taken. So students have to have those kinds of models in the classroom with which to deal. And obviously they bring various experiences that have happened out there, be they for a service or for a product or whatever the problem has been, whether it's a problem in crisis management or all the variety of problems that we may face in public relations, so that becomes part of the curriculum of the undergraduate student. Now you understand that the pressure on the other side, of course, is the fact that normally you're talking about maybe 120 or is it 124 semester hours that a student has to take. Well, we've asked the student to have a broad spectrum of liberal arts. Then we've asked them to get into some specialties that have to do with writing and analysis of problems and ability to solve problems and to measure the degree to which they were solved well. So pretty soon they've used up all their credit hours that are available in a four-year college situation. So that more and more we are saying to students, and it's happening in other disciplines as well, you ought to get a master's degree. You ought to take another 2 years of college. Well, that is not the best news that parents ever heard, nor is it the best news that a student, which is who's labored hard for 4 years, has ever heard either. So that much as there's kind of a compromise being reached. Students are going through their basic education for public relations in their undergraduate years. Many of them are going out and getting entry-level jobs and moving up, if they are capable and circumstances are hospitable, moving up into middle management, hopefully in a corporation or an agency that will encourage them to go back and get a continuing education and will help to fund a master's degree, which many of them take at night or on extended weekends or whatever the pattern is. They will get a master's degree in public relations or perhaps in the business sciences or some other area which will serve them well in their at their desks. The PhD piece of it is generally, and that's a whole other issue in education today. A PhD is generally for those who wish to pursue a career in teaching, and that's where the PhD is needed and required. Unfortunately, the pipelines with PhD candidates are not very full in public relations, or not full enough. Let me say you have today such a demand for a career in public relations that it is probably one of the the hottest disciplines you find on college campuses at this particular time. Certainly, it long ago surpassed journalism. It has some competition with from advertising and some from telecommunications, but generally speaking, we began in the last generation, or education, particularly in communications, discovered that public relations as a career choice was taking off like a rocket. So I won't get into some of the problems that we have with academic administrations today about who's teaching public relations, but suffice it to say that that we do not have enough young people who are aspiring to get that PhD in public relations or allied field so that they can teach the discipline. And it's a very promising career field for a smart, bright young person, and I hope that many are inspired to take it on as their lifetime goal.
I'm tempted to ask you about the sense that one of the problems that many people that are active in the profession feel that the problem with the education and what people are teaching is they've never had any practical experience, and that before someone should get a PhD or be a teacher or recognized as such, that they ought to spend some time in a job someplace actually trying to do what it is they're teaching. And that is a criticism that is, I can't believe that this is the first that you heard.
Of course not. But let me say that there are very few educators whom I know, and I know a lot of educators, who haven't had some experience in the practice. So that I'm really saying to my peers and colleagues, you just don't know. You're making an assumption that the educator that you met at this conference, or the educator that you met when you were in the classroom delivering a lecture, has never seen the inside of an agency or the inside of a corporation. You're mistaken, because most of them have had some kind of experience in the field, and you know we can match names about it. It's just that we don't know their backgrounds as much as we should. Now, part of that is their problem. They haven't let us know that they do have that kind of experience. And indeed, I do agree that I would hope that any young person aspiring to a PhD in a teaching career would also recognize that he or she has got to get some practical experience, a hands-on experience in the world of the practice, because of all disciplines, public relations is more like medicine. You know, you can't do it all without ever encountering the human being, and because that's what we're all about, the human encounter, and that reaches into some other problems that I have with the current field. But my point is, yes, I agree that teachers, educators should have experience in the field, and to the extent that some don't, they ought to.
If public relations people, in your judgment, have a certain persona, like lawyers seem to be like lawyers, and doctors seem to be doctors, and financial accountants are sort of like a green eyeshade type people. In your judgment, do public relations, can you ascribe a certain characteristic or persona of how you recognize a public relations person? Is there a common characteristic that if you come out of college or one of these programs that you'd have a little something that would be a little different than others?
Well, I'm not sure that we wear an A or a B or a C on our forehead or on our chest or anything like that. But I think that there is a certain style that, generally speaking, identifies or characterizes a public relations person. And let me put it this way. You often find public relations people in civic and community affairs that have nothing to do with their daily bread. There is hardly a nonprofit organization that you can scratch that doesn't have its leadership vested in public relations people. If you're sitting around such a table for a nonprofit organization with a board or a committee that's comprised of the lawyer, the businessman, the advertising man or woman, the ordinary citizen, you can usually tell who's the public relations person because first of all, they are, to get back to one of my original tenets, they're problem solvers. They will address the problem head on and not dance around it or avoid it or table it for another discussion. They're inclined to let's face up to it now. And in the same way, I always see a public relations person as someone who is looking at how we can address it. What action can we take to resolve the problem? I mean, we can either talk it to death, or or meet again, or whatever. But what's the action that we can take to resolve it? So I think that those characteristics usually will define a strong and effective public relations person, as opposed to the characteristic action of a lawyer who will think, and God bless the lawyers and God bless the accountants, but God bless the public relations people too, because they are more likely to take some intelligent, informed action about something. Yes, I think there are some characteristics that are unique.
So those are along the lines I was thinking about bright and creative and having ideas that they don't sit around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you covered that. It just seemed to me that you're sitting in a meeting with all these people. There's a lot of people, but usually the public relations person says, "Oh, have we tried this or have we thought about this?"
Right.
Thing. And that's a welcome to me.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a welcome type thing. I'm going to switch to integrity and ethics and that sort of thing. I just wondered whether you, in your just general assessment of things, because your career has spanned a period of time, as to whether you sense that there's more integrity today or there's less, or that people are more honest or less honest, or truthful or less truthful in their dealings with other people. Is there any sense of just what you think the trend is towards? Are we getting, having more, are we operating with more integrity or less? I mean, we don't want to say that the Enron and Arthur Anderson and all that stuff is going to cause us to be that way, but it's general society. Do you see that? Because I'm going to follow that with, your sense of what about the profession itself. So what do you think the people that are in our profession operate with a high degree of integrity?
Well, being a congenital optimist, I'm inclined to think that the Enrons and that ilk have spurred more attention to ethical and trustworthy behavior than we have seen in several generations. Whether or not people are more trustworthy or more ethical than they were in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, I don't know. I'm not even sure that we have any dipstick that can tell us that. On the other hand, I think the attention for and the concern about ethical behavior is at such a point today that that you are unethical or untrustworthy at your peril in public relations. I would not presume to say what it is in business and the other professions, because I just don't know. But I do think that it is getting, that the concern about ethics and trustworthy behavior and how you define it, because it's very difficult to define. It is very doubtful that you can educate a person, in my opinion, to be ethical and trustworthy if they are not nurtured that way from the very beginning. There are ways to do it, but
Do you think that ethics can be taught, or is that something you're born with?
well, I think that what ethics is, examples of ethical behavior and examples of ethical challenges can be explored and can be taught, because not all of us are aware of what those challenges can be and in what form they can come. So that part of it can be taught. Whether or not you can teach what the innate response should be, the innate ethical response should be, is and elicit that kind of response. Not on paper, and not just as an answer to a test question. Whether you can elicit that kind of response in another human being, I don't know, and I'm not sure that the experts in human behavior and the psychologists and so forth have ever given us a definitive answer, nor whether they are capable of giving us a definitive answer. So that says to me that we must care about the kind of ethical behavior and nurturing that we give people, young people, children, from the very beginning, and how we nurture that and give attention to it through their growing years. And if indeed they have not had that kind of advantage or that kind of experience, then we say to them, as a corporation, for example, if they work for that corporation, these are our standards, and we expect you to abide by these standards as long as you intend to be part of this corporate family. So that we try to come at it from two different directions. One is behavioral, and the other is requirements. This is required behavior if you intend to stay on the payroll.
Do you think that statements such as Kratos and mission statements have any value, or that they actually change people's behavior? Johnson & Johnson's Kratos, so well known as a template for how you operate or behave in that company, and other companies have these. Do you think that they do make a difference, or not? Or do you have no opinion or an opinion about value of that sort of thing?
I think that Kratos and statements of this is how we perform, and these are our expectations for your performance in terms of trust and truth and ethics. I think there is most certainly a role for that in all aspects of work life, whether it's government or profit or non-for-profit. But the flip side of that is that it has to be backed up by behavior and concern, which is quite evident. I mean, if they are simply Kratos that go into the bottom drawer, or dress up the walls of a boardroom, then they obviously accomplish very little. But they are essential if they are paired with practice and behavior, because words are very powerful, and they give meaning and influence to ideas. So that I would think that an organization would be that is ethical and that is trustworthy and that wants its employees to behave in that manner would be remiss or stupid not to put that into a credo or into something that people can refer to and believe in and say, yes, this is what we stand for. Because it's like saying you have a country without flags. That's you simply don't have that. You need a flag that expresses the behavioral expectations of that particular organization.
Some companies have appointed like an officer to be the ethics officer. Others have introduced training programs for all their employees in ethics.
I haven't gone that far.
I just wondered, if you were given a role of trying to help a company make its employees more ethical, would you, those sound like good ideas, or would you just, like the president of the corporation, who just announced that one day that one strike and you're out? And that message filtered down to all of the employees, and that says...
I think that's
for
fantastic.
behavior.
That's fantastic.
That's behavior.
And
several people were fired right after.
I love that. I love that CEO. I think there were 3 people that were fired in that particular situation. Gone. Wonderful. Absolutely, absolutely wonderful. You can't. but as far as appointing ethics officers, and I'm reminded of one of the principles of Mr. Page, a man we revere so very much in the public relations profession. I think is that the public relations representatives for the company are all of its employees, and I think that's probably one of the wisest observations that has ever been made in our profession. In the same way, if you seek to bracket ethics and trustworthy behavior and so forth, and house it in a particular office with a particular person, it seems to me it risks getting pigeonholed and not being a part of the total behavior of all the employees. So I'm speaking out of ignorance because I've never worked for a company that had a director of ethics or a vice president for ethics. I have always assumed that all of the leaders of any company with which I've been associated with are men and women of ethical behavior and personal trust, and I've rarely been disappointed, and I've lived a long time.
Over the years, in your keen observation of the field of public relations, have you noticed any kind of changes, or is it basically the same, or have there been changes in it from your standpoint? What constitutes public relations? Is there greater emphasis on research, for example, or is crisis management becoming the more important thing in investor relations? What's your take on the overall field of public relations and what's going on?
Well, it's obviously a profession, a field which is evolving, and a profession which is in the process of becoming more and more professional. And if it doesn't change or isn't changing, then something is dreadfully wrong with it. In my observation, it has changed radically and rapidly. When I joined the field immediately after World War II, we were facing a society that had a lot of pent-up desires for consumer goods. It was, a runaway market, and companies that were offering services and products couldn't find enough people who could write. That was why they were raiding newspapers so much, for people who could handle basic publicity, product publicity, which was pretty much what the field was all about, from my observation in the late 40s and early 50s. And then you saw many companies begin to go public, and so there was a need for communication in financial public relations, and that was the groundswell that occurred in the 50s. And come the 60s, and you had the societal turbulence that we were facing every place from the campus to the street, and in all that we were beginning to encounter the need for crisis management and learning more about corporate social responsibility than we ever had before. And then we You know, the society was changing into one that was very litigious and very regulated, so that relationships with regulators and legislators and so forth began to take a priority, and overarching all of this became the development in technology, which has had such an incredible impact on our business. It's been frightening me since the late 70s, but nevertheless, it's inevitable and pretty amazing in some of its effects, and the globalization of the practice as business has become globalized. That has had a tremendous impact on public relations. So we keep being the creature of societal evolution, and because we are dealing with the needs and relationships within that society. I mean, anything that happens in the society, be it women's issues or civil rights or gays and lesbians or whatever it is, in terms of our social fabric, it impacts the organizations which we serve. And therefore, if we are going to be brokers of relationships with various segments of the society, then we have to know something about what's going on out there and be ahead of that curve, so that what I've seen in my, how many years? Some 50 plus years, or more than I care to count. I've seen the focus grow from marketing, which is a more respectable term than product publicity, from marketing, and certainly that's a more sophisticated definition of promoting a product and service. That segment is still thriving and still important and still very much a part of the practice of public relations. But it's by no means, the full pie. When you look at financial public relations and and social responsibility and all the various segments of the practice, and then we're the evolution of marketing into branding and all that kind of nomenclature.
Well, there are some that feel that public relations is a subset of marketing. And,
oh well, and I do not intend to get rough or nasty about this. I think it's it's absurd, and everybody keeps. Public relations has become so successful and so inevitable in the life of organizations today, that it keeps trying, that other groups keep trying to co-opt it. It's true of advertising, because advertising, went through its decline, and public relations became the possibility of a cash cow to shore up their declining fortunes. At least that's my shorthand reading of it. I think the same thing is true of marketing. Looking at public relations as simply part of marketing is very myopic. Indeed, marketing and public relations have, much in common and much to gain one another and in behalf of their clients. But marketing does not define public relations.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that. I have a different perspective where I would believe most of these disciplines, including advertising, are subsets of public relations, or what I would call the general field of corporate communications. They're all subsets of something bigger, which is your relations with the public, and i.e. public include internal as well as external public relations. But one of the things that you didn't, I'm not going to get expressing my own viewpoints here, but one of the things that has happened, I think, over the years, and you've been a big part of and represented it, is the increasing number of talented women who have come into the field of public relations, who have done extraordinary jobs, and in fact the field was opened up to women. I think when I first came myself, it was, it was 80-20 men to women. Now it's about 60-40 or 70-30 women to men. And I think that's been a significant and a very positive change. I don't know how you feel about that, or whether that's appropriate, but that's a big, from my standpoint, a big change in a positive way. I mean, I have a different way of looking at it than you do.
Well, first of all, from my viewpoint, public relations has always been a very hospitable field to public relations, or to women, comparatively speaking. Certainly that was true when I entered the field, since agencies and corporations and nonprofits were facing a need to fill positions for which there had been basically no education. So they were having to raid other career fields, such as newspaper reporting and radio and so forth. And they really didn't care what guise the packaging came in, whether it was male or female or whatever. So in a way, women got an earlier foothold in this profession than they had in other professions. It has taken longer, much longer, for women to make any progress, say, in accounting or in the law and in medicine. How long it took in medicine, well, anyway, we're not being that historic in this conversation. But so women always had a legitimacy in the contemporary practice, and that's very good. What bothers me about today, the disparity today, for example, in the Public Relations Student Society of America, which is the love of my professional life, about 80% of those students are young women. Now, that bothers me a great deal. I have been inclined to say along the way of a long career, it never bothered us when the population of men in the field was 80% and the women were only 20%. Now, however, it bothers. Well, it bothers me because of a lot of perceptions. It bothers me because there is a perception out there that public relations within the academic environment is a soft discipline. That's not true, and I'll fight that vigorously. But the perception, nevertheless, is there, so that you find many of our brightest and best young men who are going into science and math, which are perceived as, tough, macho studies. Now, perhaps that pendulum shall swing too, because I can't think of anything tougher or more macho than dealing with the impudence of human behavior. But I may not live long enough to see that admission come to the fore. In the meantime, the fact that our studies are being populated primarily by very bright, conscientious, and dedicated young women becomes a mixed blessing. If, for example, those fortunes were reversed today, there would be much hue and cry. Believe me, there would be much hue and cry about saying, well, we must get more representation from the women because they constitute 50 or 55% of the population in the United States and so forth. So I say, where is that concern for us when we see that the pendulum is, tilting the other way? However, we may both live long enough to see it swinging back, because I think public relations as both a discipline and a practice has many charms and challenges which are going to appeal to the next generation. But it has been absolutely correct. It has been receptive to women, and women have indeed made great contributions to the field and had very successful careers in public relations. It's interesting that even though our current population within the academic community has a deep tilt toward women, you don't yet find that altogether reflected in the leadership in the profession out here. But things change slowly.
That was a very good and complete answer. What other issues or does public relations profession face today in your judgment? Is the issue of being licensed or accredited, is that to your mind a major issue, or are there other things like that public relations professionally ought to be trying to deal with and changing perception? I think your thought about public relations being perceived as a soft profession is right on.
I didn't say it's a soft profession. It's a soft discipline. Yeah, and whether it is a soft profession, I mean, well, yeah. Anyway, we'll leave that on. Ed Bernays and I always had a little private battle. Every time he came to Chicago, he would make his customary speech on why we should have licensing in public relations, and I was one of the vocal opponents of the business of licensing for public relations, and still am on the side that public relations is probably has its roots in the First Amendment, and it's a very slippery slope if we would succumb to licensing and become more or less like barbers and beauticians and anybody, and risk being able to buy our way into the business. Accreditation, I have very mixed feelings about it. I do like tests, and I think that tests are, I always thought tests were fun, and I think they're a good thing to have to to test one's experience and one's capacity to perform and so forth. But it all depends, of course, on, as far as accreditation in public relations is concerned, it all depends on who writes the test and then who grades the test. But that's, you know, and that's the nature of testing. I think that to impose accreditation and testing on all those in the practice of public relations is folly. In the last campaign that Pat Jackson and I ever fought for together was to get the Public Relations Society of America to accept the fact that if someone were anointed and named for the Gold Anvil, which is the highest accolade that the PRSA can bestow, that whether or not they were accredited, they should be admitted to the College of Fellows. And happily, that was one battle that we won. So that opened the door to the College of Fellows, of which I'm a part, and I respect the group very much indeed. That opened the door to allow them to welcome people such as Ed Block, who never became accredited, but who richly deserved and earned and was honored by the Gold Anvil. Mm-hmm. And he's a member of the College of Fellows. So that I think that to be very rigid about accreditation and examination is the height of folly and bureaucratic nonsense. At the same time, I think some means for accreditation should be in place and has great value for those who wish to take advantage of it.
What led you to establish the Planck Center for Public Relations at the University of Alabama?
I didn't establish it. I had attended, the University of Alabama is my alma mater, and I was one of its most avid and enthusiastic history and political science majors and English lit majors. And I learned very late in life that it had a wonderful College of Communication and Information Sciences, and that I had never encountered when I was on campus, which is, you know, back in the dark ages. Some way or other they encountered me. I don't know where they found me or how they found me, but the dean and one of his colleagues called one day and said they were going to be in Chicago and let's have dinner, and I said fine, and that was the beginning of a long and productive love affair. Along the way, and I had gotten, over time, had gotten involved very much with their public relations studies, for which I have a very high regard. And then I think the dean wrote to me, yes, he wrote to me and said that he was proposing the idea of a center for leadership in public relations. And was that all right with me? And I was shocked and delighted and, you know, and obviously very pleased and very honored. that he would propose such an idea, and it was threaded through the Board of Trustees at the university, and they saluted. And so we now have a center which is devoted, or whose mission is focused on leadership in public relations. It had originally, there was some debate, some early on debate, that the center have in its name the word ethics, and it still focuses on that kind of trustworthy behavior, but we opted eventually for the word leadership to embrace all that in terms of both performance, but ethical performance and trustworthy behavior. So so we shall be, and already have, sponsored some research on that subject. This is the first year, really, of the operation of the center. We are sponsoring among the PRSSA chapters a campaign to have public relations students become recognized and become active advocates for ethical behavior on campus, where so much that is questionable is going on in terms of cheating, etc., and being abetted by technology every day. We also offer some scholarships and some lectureships, and so we're feeling our way toward a very, what we hope will be a very collegial outreach to other organizations, both in academia and in the profession at large, so that we can all move together toward advocacy for ethical and trustworthy behavior, and be looking at what constitutes leadership and character in public relations, its performance as well as its practitioners.
Do you have a sense of what you would consider to be successful, or that they were achieving the aspirations that you just outlined? What would be something that would happen that would make you feel very good about the fact that they're on their way and successfully moving in the direction towards creating a more ethical environment, particularly in the leadership and profession in this way?
Well, the thing I hope for the most, and the bellwether that I see for this, is whether or not we can help to encourage and promote similar efforts in other academic institutions. We are not arrogant enough to think that we can do it all on our own, nor are we selfish enough to think that we should do it all on our own. We really want to be in concert, in collegial concert with other academic institutions who are focusing on the leadership qualities, which include trust, truth, ethical behavior in the practice of public relations. And I would hope that we would be very seminal in that mission, and that 10 years from now, whether or not I'm still around, there will be multiple centers or units within colleges and universities that will have similar missions, and that we can cooperate with one another in accomplishing that and presenting kind of a united front to the younger generation.
It's a terrific goal ahead, and I'm sure that you'll be successful, and the center will be successful.
I hope you're a good prophet.
I'm at really down near the end here. I'm just going to ask you some quick questions. They're sort of personal type. They're not, well, they're personal in a certain way. They're trying to, in various people that are interviewed, to get some kind of sense of what makes them who they are. You've already, one of the things that would ask you, like, who are some of the people that had the greatest influence on your career or your life? And you kind of touched on that, but I wondered if there were other people that you might want to include, because say as far as mentors go, you mentioned Duffy Schwartz as being a mentor, and she was certainly that, and much more as a person. And I just wondered if there were some people that, in particular, that made an impact on you in a certain way that helped you get through your life, and made you a better public relations person in the process.
Well, I do believe a great deal in nurture. So one has to, if that nurturing has been good and productive toward one's adult career life, one has to give a lot of credit to the patience and example of one's parents, and I have never known a finer public relations person in my life than my father, who was an executive with a public utility, and a civil engineer of some consequence, who never quite understood public relations or what business I was in, but he was one of the native practitioners of it, and the kind of person that you would, when you talk about ethics and trustworthy behavior, he was an exemplar. We come up through, a lot of education and a lot of teaching and teachers, and I've already mentioned the one who pointed me in the direction of some strange craft called public relations, who was Duffy Schwartz, and I've been blessed along the way with many wonderful colleagues and mentors. Certainly, I'm extremely grateful to Dan Edelman for the productive years I spent under his roof, and with all that I learned and had to learn when I was with that firm. Certainly, I feel the same way about people in the Bell system, such as Paul Lund and Jack Coton and Ed Block and many people who exhibited the best in terms of practice and behavior and brilliance in many occasions. And the professional side of my life, I could not let this opportunity escape without mentioning people like Harold Bateman, who was remarkable leader in his time in the 60s and the 70s, and who really is the person who helped me fall in love with education for public relations. I've had colleagues that I've been very proud to march with, like David Ferguson and Pat Jackson, and none of those names that I've mentioned still populate this planet, because I don't want to risk mentioning anyone who's still walking lively here, for fear that I will omit someone and feel guilty and unhappy about that for weeks to come. One of the things I think that is very characteristic of public relations people is their desire to be very supportive of one another. Very recently, a colleague of ours died. His name was Herbert Bain, and Herb was a strong leader in the business, and who sat on many boards and did much in terms of civil rights, and believed in the importance of trustworthy behavior. And he was the one, when walking one day away from the Hilton Hotel, and the sun was shining happily, we'd been at a meeting there, and he said to me, 1960 or 61, why don't you run for president of the Publicity Club of Chicago? Which was a very big deal in that town. And I said, you are absurd. No one, they would never consider having a woman president of this important and aging order. No, he said, I'm going to nominate you. You run, you'll get it. Well, it happened, and he masterminded it all, and sure enough, that summer I was sitting the next summer I was sitting on the beach in Michigan City looking at the bylaws for the Publicity Club of Chicago, because I was going to be president come fall. It was an amazing experience, and the sky did not fall, and so subsequently I became president of other organizations down the line, primarily the Public Relations Society of America. And again, everyone along the way was extremely supportive. I am not aware that anyone ever gave me a hard time, ever stood in my way, ever challenged me because I was a woman. They simply were highly supportive of the whole venture, and it was not something that everybody took it in stride, let's put it that way. And so I've been very, very blessed with that kind of experience and support. And I'm kind of, my sense is that that's just simply the style of good public relations people, to be supportive of one another.
Well, you have a highly infectious personality, sweet people out there, and so you'll never find people that will resist anything that you do, because you just envelop people. If you hadn't had a career in public relations, what do you think you might have done, or would you have liked to have done?
I don't know, probably something to do with writing, and probably something to do with advocacy. One of the things that I'm proudest of in my life is a result of an impulse. I'm a very impulsive kind of person, and it gets me in lots of trouble sometimes, and sometimes, but it's well worth the experience often, and it was the impulse to join the last leg of the march from Selma to Montgomery in 1965. And I have a feeling, because I was concerned about civil rights, and I'm a native Southerner, and cared very much about that whole issue in its many facets. I probably would have been a writer and a troublemaker in some respect, and I think civil rights would have captured my interest and time. I could only march the last leg in '65, but I'm glad I went, and I'm glad I was a part of that kind of historic event. But I rather suspect that if I hadn't gone into public relations, I would have gone into some kind of advocacy of that kind.
How would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as someone who championed the next generation of our profession.
Okay. Betsy, that's my last question. Not that I don't have plenty more here, but you covered the waterfront very wonderfully this afternoon. And I'm not sure if there's something else that you would like to say that you didn't get a chance to say. This would be a good opportunity to get anything out that you would like to express. It would be locked in the Penn State website, which would be available for people for generations to come to find. If we miss something, I want to give you that opportunity.
Well, I just hope you've asked me about the center at the University of Alabama, and of course it was preceded by the Page Center at Penn State, and we are very fortunate to have that pioneer in Larry Foster, and who put it all together and who has made it happen. And I would hope that being prejudiced as I am about the next generation of students, and particularly the organization that represents them, the Public Relations Student Society of America, I see that among its 9,000 members are the next generations, Alan Center and Howard Chase and Scott Cutlip and Hale Nelson and Marilyn Laurie and Pat Jackson and Ann Barkaloo and all the people who have lit up our professional skies in the past. Someplace among those 9,000 students are the Next Generations group, and I would hope that among all of its wonderful activities and missions that the Page Center at Penn State would also do much to outreach to that next generation, and to help it become all it can be, and I'm sure that it will. So God bless that prophecy.